On Thursday, just before noon, a Korean Air Boeing 747 jet with 368 seats took off from Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, bound for Seoul, South Korea.
On board, some 300 South Korean citizens who had been detained by federal authorities during a sweeping immigration raid at the site of an electric vehicle battery plant near Savannah.
This has been a multi-month criminal investigation where we have developed evidence, conducted interviews, gathered documents, and presented that evidence to the court in order to obtain a judicial search warrant.
The raid is testing relations with South Korea, where companies spent decades building ties in the U.S. and investing billions in new factories here.
But the detentions have left some South Korean companies and politicians rattled.
South Korea's president said companies may hesitate to make new investments in the U.S. without changes to the visa system.
아마 진출한 우리 기업들이 매우 당황스러운 상태일 거예요. 기업들 입장에서는
Georgia has deep ties with South Korea. The Hyundai Meta plant next to the battery facility was billed as the largest economic development project in state history.
It is my great honor to officially announce that Hyundai Motor Group will build their first dedicated electric vehicle manufacturing plant right here in this good soil in Bryan County. Right there.
And that's putting some Republicans like Governor Brian Kemp, who champion the project and also support the Trump administration's illegal immigration crackdown, in an awkward position.
On this week's Plugged In, we take a closer look at the ongoing fallout from the Hyundai raid.
And WABE immigration reporter Emily Wu Pearson is here with a deep dive into federal immigration detention here in Georgia. I'm WABE politics reporter Sam Gringlas.
I'm WABE politics reporter Rahul Bali, and this is Plugged In from WABE. So Republicans in Georgia spent years building ties with companies in South Korea, culminating in Hyundai locating a multi-billion-dollar electric vehicle plant outside of Savannah. But last week, a battery factory on that site was raided by federal immigration agents who detained some 300 South Korean citizens. And Sam, you report this week that incident has put Republicans in an awkward position.
Yeah, that's right. When the Trump administration announced the largest workplace immigration raid in American history, many Georgia Republicans, they swiftly cheered the news. Round 'em Up posted Congressman Mike Collins. Representative Buddy Carter applauded what he called Trump's bold action. But apart from kind of an anodyne statement last Friday by a spokesperson for the governor's office, Governor Brian Kemp himself hasn't said anything.
Now, Sam, we've been pressing the governor's office for more, and they did respond with a longer statement on Wednesday from a spokesperson writing in part about their South Korean partners like Hyundai. Quote, "We are thankful they are reiterating their commitment to adhere to all state and federal laws, just as we remain committed to not allowing this unfortunate incident to undo the decades of mutually beneficial partnership we've built together." Unquote.
Again, a statement from a spokesperson there, not from Kemp himself. I talked to Republican strategist Brian Robinson about Kemp's tricky position here.
He's the one who does have somewhat of a balancing act. He's got to, on the one hand, consider his politics in Georgia, but also he's got to make sure that the South Koreans feel appreciated and make sure that bridges don't get burned.
During Kemp's first campaign for governor, he ran an ad you probably remember offering to round up illegal immigrants himself in his pickup truck. And this summer, Kemp dispatched the Georgia National Guard to help with the Trump administration's immigration enforcement efforts. But Kemp has also pledged to make Georgia the electric mobility capital of the world, promising thousands of new jobs with the help of generous state incentives. Now, the Hyundai plant next to the battery facility, which is a joint venture of both Hyundai and LG Energy Solution, has been billed as the largest economic development project in state history, but also South Korean companies like SK Battery and solar panel maker Q-Cells have invested billions in the state too. Kemp even accepted the Korea Society's most prestigious award back in 2023.
The peach is a meaningful symbol to us both. I understand that in Korea it represents happiness, prosperity, and longevity. That pretty well sums up Georgia's relationship with Korea.
And of course, Georgia's relationship with South Korea goes back decades.
Yeah, and Georgia's had an economic development office in Seoul for a really long time. In 2006, Hyundai's parent company, Kia, broke ground on a huge plant in West Georgia. And Robinson remembers traveling to South Korea with Kemp's predecessor, Nathan Deal, dining with Hyundai executives at a fancy hotel in Seoul.
We had these South Korean companies come in and really transform parts of the state. All of a sudden, there's some Korean restaurants in former sleepy southern towns.
Robinson says these investments brought new life to struggling parts of rural Georgia. And Trump has also urged companies to make their products in the U.S. And so that is one kind of complicated dynamic that's happening here.
And we're going to have to train people. And the way you train people is bring people in that know what they're doing and let them stay for a little while and help. So I'm going to look at that. So it's a very interesting situation that took place in Georgia.
All of this is making South Korean companies jittery about investing further in the U.S. On Thursday, South Korea's president said that companies will likely hesitate to continue investing in this country without improvements to the visa system. Our colleague, WABE business reporter Marlon Hyde, has been digging into this angle more, and he spoke to Andrew Yo. He's the Korea chair at the Brookings Institution.
This was seen by South Koreans as a stab in the back, just because of the nature of this raid and how public it has become. And it's also put a chill, I think, on other foreign companies who have invested heavily in the United States.
And the raid has also, Rahul, provided an opening for maybe more populist-minded Georgia Republicans to dial up their criticism of foreign corporations coming into Georgia. Congressman Collins, who's running for U.S. Senate, posted, "Tax dollars should not be used to steal jobs away from Georgia workers." And one thing I noticed is Collins and other Senate candidates trying to tie Hyundai to their opponent, Democratic U.S. Senator Jon Ossoff, but not to Kemp. And so that could be why Collins declined our interview request on this topic.
Yeah, that is tricky. It's difficult to attack a Democratic U.S. senator for being supportive when this is Kemp's project. Voters aren't unclear on that.
And Sam, is it just Republicans who are having to walk a fine line here?
Nope.
I'm ashamed as to where we're headed. I almost wish we would take the Statue of Liberty and send it back to France because we've lost our way.
Democrats like State Senator Derek Mallow of Savannah have slammed Trump's immigration tactics.
But I also want to make sure that I don't have a corporate entity that is knowingly and intentionally subverting the law. And I also want to make sure that the people who are citizens in this state are receiving the opportunities that were promised when this project came.
A Korean Airjet was chartered to bring the 300 South Koreans from Atlanta to Seoul, but the economic, diplomatic, and political fallout from the incident is far from over.
Let's take a break here. This is Plugged In from WABE. Welcome back to Plugged In from WABE. Joining us now is WABE immigration reporter Emily Wu Pearson. Emily, welcome back to the show.
Hey, Rahul. Thanks for having me.
So first, Emily, let's stay with this Hyundai story. You've been working to find out more about the Korean workers, who they were, why they were here, and what happens next. And so tell us what you've learned.
I talked to Atlanta-based immigration attorney Charles Cook, who's representing about a dozen South Korean citizens arrested in the raid. And he says they were here for temporary installation projects at the plant before it opened. Then once the plant opened, it would hire U.S.-based workers.
What was happening at this plant is the exact same thing that has happened at dozens of other plants around the United States over the last decade.
Cook told me the workers have highly specialized knowledge of Korean and Japanese machinery because they'd worked on the products in Asia. As part of his clients' cases, he also asked the manufacturing companies why Americans couldn't do this part of the work. And he was told Americans could move to Korea for the 2 to 3 years it takes to become proficient enough to properly install the machinery, then go to sites for jobs that last a couple of weeks, but there aren't currently U.S. citizens with the qualifications for installation.
And it's not super typical to see Korean citizens wrapped up in this kind of immigration enforcement. Can you put this into context and maybe tell us how this workplace raid fits into what we've seen more broadly when it comes to immigration enforcement from the Trump administration?
Yeah, this round of the Trump administration has been about high visibility immigration arrests in largely Democrat-led cities. In Georgia, a lot of ICE arrests happen through jails due to statewide partnerships between law enforcement and ICE. So I took a look at the numbers from the Deportation Data Project. That's a group that FOIAs ICE for details about immigration arrests. That data shows from January 2023 to July of this year, out of more than 7,000 immigration arrests in Georgia, only 8 people were citizens of South Korea. It's really unusual for South Koreans to have immigration violations here.
Emily, let's zoom out here. You have spent months tracking how the Trump administration is reshaping immigration enforcement in the U.S. And last week, your reporting took you to Lumpkin, Georgia, and the home of a U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement facility. Can you start by describing this facility and also the town where it's located?
Yeah, I was on the other side of Georgia from where the raid happened. I was in Stewart County to visit Stewart Detention Center. It's less than a mile from a town called Lumpkin. Lumpkin is a collection of empty storefronts built when the town had thousands of residents during the height of slavery and profits from cotton. Now the population shrinks every year, and there are about 900 people in the town. The detention center actually has more than twice the number of detainees right now than the town has residents, just to give some context.
Wow.
Stewart County also doesn't have a hospital. It has only one grocery store, and Lumpkin itself actually doesn't have any grocery stores. They have a Dollar Tree, a Family Dollar, and a Dollar General.
So it sounds like one hurdle for the people detained at Stewart is that it's isolated, that it's kind of hard to access if you're like an immigration attorney. Talk more about why it's so challenging and why counsel is important.
Yeah. Unlike in criminal court in the U.S., people in immigration court are not provided free legal counsel if they can't afford an attorney. But research from the American Immigration Council found that detained people who have an attorney are 2 times more likely to get immigration relief. If you're not in detention but are in some kind of immigration proceedings, having that attorney makes it 5 times more likely you will actually win your immigration case. So the odds really matter here. There are no immigration attorneys in Stewart County, which means your immigration attorney is either 45 minutes away in Columbus or 2.5 hours away in Atlanta, or they could be in Florida or Alabama as well. But I met with one immigration attorney, Samantha Hamilton, in Lumpkin. She's an attorney with Asian Americans Advancing Justice Atlanta.
There are a handful of nonprofits in Georgia that provide pro bono legal services to people in detention. You can attend court hearings over WebEx, like over Zoom, but it's not necessarily the same as, being able to, connect with your client in person.
In my reporting, I've often heard there's fewer than a dozen attorneys who provide free legal support to detainees at Stewart, and right now there's about 2,000 people detained at Stewart.
And Emily, you've been exploring ways that groups are trying to get help to people at Stewart despite how few resources are in that area.
That's right. In Lumpkin, there's no hotels, there's no motels, and Stewart detains people arrested across the country. So people are trying to visit their loved ones in detention, and they might have to fly into Atlanta and drive down, then drive an hour away to stay in a hotel. Or some people are driving across the entire Southeast to visit. So some folks got together and started a nonprofit called El Refugio. They have a house in Lumpkin that can sleep up to 25 people, and they open up the house on the weekends to people trying to visit someone at Stewart. It's free, and volunteers cook and clean and try to connect visitors with resources if needed. Almicar Valencia leads El Refugio, and I got to talk with him at the house last weekend.
It's just word of mouth. It's just a regular phone number that they can dial, and they can talk to us. And we have staff and volunteers who answer those calls. And sometimes I need a place I need someone to visit me, or my loved one would like to come and visit me. Can you help me to figure that out?
The volunteers drive from out of town each weekend to help in whatever ways they can.
Emily, you were talking about how much of a difference it makes for people in deportation proceedings to have an attorney. And you actually got to sit in the immigration court at Stewart. You couldn't record, but tell us what that was like and also what struck you about what you saw.
I got to listen in on what's called a master calendar hearing. It's where people in detention hear for the first time what DHS has against them for their charges. The Stewart court is actually attached to the detention center, and Atlanta is the only other place in Georgia with immigration court. Also, a fun fact, immigration court is open to the public if you're interested in that kind of thing like I am. But I spent about an hour in the courtroom, and about a dozen people were seen by the judge in that time period. Some were accused of overstaying visas. Others were accused of entering the U.S. without authorization. And people were from all over, from Haiti, Iran, Mexico. There was a Spanish language interpreter in the courtroom and 3 different translation hotlines available, and all 3 were used in the hour that I was there. But what really stood out to me were the people who accepted that deportation was going to move forward no matter what. Only 5 people asked for more time for their case or to bring an attorney in. One man mentioned he called an immigration attorney hotline, but the phone rang, and he never got an answer. So he would just accept that the deportation proceedings would move forward. I got a copy of the brochure that the court had available to people in detention for pro bono legal services. There were 2 phone numbers for DC-based organization, one for an Atlanta-based organization and another in Florida. So again, legal services are for few and far between. But largely, people accepted that they were getting deported, which I didn't really expect.
So a thread that I've been really interested in going back to the first Trump administration is what these massive facilities mean for the towns where they're located. Back in 2017, I visited a huge detention facility in Texas that had been closed under Obama, but was reopening under Trump. And I imagine Stewart employs a lot of people in Lumpkin, right? Like, what does this mean for the community?
It actually doesn't. Mac Moy is the county manager for Stewart County, and he told me of about 600 employees at the detention center. Only 90 people live in Stewart County.
90 out of 600 is not what I want it to be. And I think the single biggest issue is housing.
There's no apartment complexes in Lumpkin, and Moy is working with the state to learn how to establish affordable housing in a rural county like his. But I also chatted with Alice Hamilton, who's lived in the county for 35 years, and she actually lives in Lumpkin proper. She says people ask all the time to rent or buy her house.
I'm going to be real honest with you. The value on my home will not buy me one thing in Michigan, not anywhere, nowhere. So I can't possibly sell my home and then go up there and replace my home.
Her kids live in Michigan, but she says she couldn't even afford to buy a house in Georgia either. So people can't get in, but they also can't get out. Another thing I learned is federal estimates from the Office of Inspector General show in recent years, ICE pays a little more than $33 million per month towards Stewart Detention Center. Stewart County makes about $600,000 per year from fees the detention center pays, but the millions are collected by the private prison company that runs the facility, CoreCivic. So Stewart County is in a hard place. The detention center does bring money for sure, but Stewart County is also, according to census data, one of the most impoverished counties in the country. Here's Moy again.
The way the commission views it is that we have 2 ambulances at any given moment in the day, whereas these other counties around here just have 1 running.
And Moy said the money coming in from Stewart Detention Center is the difference between having 2 ambulances versus 1.
Wow, that's pretty incredible. Emily, what will you be watching on your beat next?
Outside of where the money goes for immigration detention, I'm keeping tabs on what's happening with refugees. Georgia historically is a state that resettles a lot of refugees, and that's stopped. Funding for refugee resettlement has been cut, and now SNAP eligibility has been removed for refugees. The next thing that's going to happen that's already been approved is refugees will lose access to Medicare and Medicaid eligibility. So I'm asking what's going to happen to these folks that were invited to redo their lives in Georgia, but then were left here without any resources.
WABE immigration reporter Emily Wu Pearson. Emily, thank you so much for your reporting.
Thanks for having me today.
And that's it for this edition of Plugged In from WABE.
Plugged In is produced by Brendan Rivers. Our managing editor is Alex Helmick. And thanks to WABE Deputy Managing Editor Molly Samuel, who has edited the Hyundai coverage this week.
Plugged In is available wherever you want to listen. If you listen on demand, head over to the Plugged In feed to subscribe and leave a rating.
You can also now find us on the radio at 90.1 Friday morning from 9:30 to 10.
And remember, as public media faces an uncertain funding stream, you can support this work with a gift at wabe.org/donate. I'm WABE politics reporter Rahul Bali.
I'm WABE politics reporter Sam Gringlas. We'll be back next week.